Guerrilla Games' first foray into the realm of action RPG games, Horizon Zero Dawn, takes place far in the future after the death and rebirth of humanity. As the subtitle of the game implies, Project Zero Dawn was pivotal in the salvation of the human race. Discovering what happened is a major part of the game's plot, so beware of spoilers ahead. The story of Project Zero Dawn began when Ted Faro founded Faro Automated Solutions in 2033. But this was the problem, not the solution. As its name implies, FAS specialized in the development of robotic bodyguards, assistants, and other technologies. At its inception, it was strongly outclassed by other more established tech giants, but it managed to turn things around during the climate crisis of the 2040s. The effort, spearheaded by Dr. Elizabeth Sobek, included a line of green robots and a wide-ranging cleanup and detoxification effort. This was a great success for both the accounting and public relations departments, making FAS both the richest and most beloved corporation in the world. By the end of the decade, Ted Faro began to shift the company's focus to a very different priority. FAS opened its military division and began developing a line of combat bots known as Chariot. This project and drastic shift in priority alienated Dr. Sobek, causing her to leave FAS and create her own company called Miriam Technologies, which ended up becoming the world's largest supplier of green robots. In contrast, FAS ended up controlling 61% of the entire world market share for automated weapons platforms. Since war was now entirely automated, and human soldiers were rendered obsolete in all but command roles, this was a significant figure in both revenue for FAS and number of robots in service. The military robots were the brainchild of Ted Faro himself, who personally conceptualized and oversaw the entire project. They were entirely self-sufficient and operated in groups known as swarms. This meant that, like some insects, they were able to operate as one. Faro also mandated that these robots have the ability to assume control of other robots, and run on an operating system encrypted using a functionally unbreakable cipher with no backdoor. As for being self-sufficient, all models in the Chariot line were intelligent and capable of self-repair, self-replication, and burning biomass to refuel in an emergency. Essentially, they were capable of running indefinitely as long as there was biomass-like plants around to be converted into fuel. But this wasn't supposed to be common practice. Late in 2064, something happened that wasn't supposed to. A Chariot swarm owned by the Hearts Timor Energy Combine experienced a glitch that caused it to become independent, no longer responding to orders from the corporation that purchased it. These robots began attacking everything that was not part of the swarm, including employees of the corporation and any non-Chariot robots owned by the corporation, and set about self-replicating. FAS was contacted immediately for a solution, but there was nothing they could do. Because of Faro's mandates, a remote shutdown command could not be executed to stop the swarm, and breaking the encryption through brute force would take longer than the Earth now had left. So began the Faro Plague. Shortly after the glitch that set the Hearts Timor swarm on its rampage, Faro swallowed his pride and reached back out to Dr. Elizabeth Sobek in search of a quick fix. She was understandably horrified at what had been done, but was unable to do anything but confirm what Faro already knew. Within 15 months, all life on Earth would be eradicated. The swarm had switched to its emergency biomass burning as its primary refueling method, meaning that all organic matter on Earth would quite literally be burned to sustain it. Within 15 months, the planet would be a barren, sterile wasteland. However, though this was an apocalyptic scenario, Dr. Sobek came up with a plan. She proposed an ambitious approach known as Project Zero Dawn. Dr. Sobek would head a team of the most brilliant minds in the world to develop systems that would be able to not only shut down the Faro Plague, but to heal the damage that had been done to the world. This involved creating a total of 10 artificially intelligent systems that would each focus on a different part of the problem. Project Zero Dawn was organized by function, with scientists being assigned as alphas, betas, or gammas depending on role and function. Dr. Sobek, as leader of the project, was Alpha Prime, meaning that her clearance could override anyone else's. For the project to succeed in such a tight timeline, it would need complete cooperation from the entire world. It would also need to slow down the machine's advance in order to succeed. Fortunately, Dr. Sobek had a plan for this as well. She met with the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff to share this plan, and it was put into action. Operation Enduring Freedom was headed personally by JCS Chairman General Aaron Harries. The remaining people of Earth came together to wage total war against the Faro Plague. Long decommissioned human militaries were dusted off and brought back into action, while civilians were organized into militias and trained in the use of military weapons. They would fight to the last man to give Zero Dawn the time it needed to develop a solution. What the world didn't know, and what they could never learn, was that they couldn't succeed. Project Zero Dawn was not a mission of victory, it was one of recovery. There simply was not enough time to break the swarm's encryption or to develop some mythical superweapon that could win the war. Humanity's remaining populace was called on to sacrifice itself to buy time for Zero Dawn, and that is exactly what it did. Enduring Victory was even able to achieve multiple victories against the swarm, but the machines were still unstoppable as things currently stood. Early in 2066, Zero Day occurred. The last of the human military forces fell. What little life remained followed soon after as the machines consumed organic matter to survive. Zero Dawn, however, was just beginning. Throughout the nearly year and a half between the glitch and the last breath of humanity, the scientists of Project Zero Dawn were hard at work. At facilities across the world, they prepared and developed the tools that would be needed for life to be reborn. Bunkers were built, data was gathered, and an endless amount of coding and debugging took place. Enduring Victory bought the team just enough time to finish their hermetically sealed and electronically shielded workspaces so they could finish what they started. The project itself, as previously mentioned, was divided between 10 systems. Its main governing AI, known as Gaia, would be assisted by 9 subordinate functions with different focuses. Together, they formed a terraforming system that would shut down the swarm, heal the planet, and begin repopulating it. Each function was developed by an alpha, all of which were world-renowned experts in their respective fields, and were supported by a team of specialists, the betas and the gammas. Once the project was completed, the scientists and their immediate families, or 2 people of their choosing, were to live out their natural lives in Elysium. Some of the scientists elected to either opt out and allow a third person of their choosing to take their place in Elysium, or to instead opt for medical euthanasia. Regardless of the choice made, all entrants into Elysium were required to be medically sterilized to avoid population growth. This was a requirement, despite the shelter holding enough resources to last 100 years, because it was projected that everyone would starve within 30 years if residents procreated. Evacuating to Elysium did not quite go as planned. While Operation Enduring Victory did technically succeed in delaying the Pharaoh Plague, it did not buy as much time as was originally hoped. As the last human defenses fell, first the Gammas and then the Betas, as well as all of their companions, were evacuated to Elysium. The Alphas were meant to follow, but were forced to stay at Gaia Prime to finish up work on the subordinate functions since the swarm broke through before it was anticipated. Everyone made it to their respective safe zones, and the real work began. Gaia's subordinate functions, like Gaia herself, were also each named after deities from the Greek/Roman pantheon. The 9 subordinate functions, in order of activation, were Minerva, Hephaestus, Ether, Poseidon, Demeter, Artemis, Eleuthia, Apollo, and Hades. Each name reflects the purview of the subordinate function. Minerva was named after the Roman aspect of the goddess of knowledge, and was overseen by Iomide Ochilo to serve perhaps the most important purpose in the entire project. Immediately upon Gaia's activation, Minerva set to work deciphering the shutdown code for the Pharaoh Plague. Once it had brute forced the decryption, the code was to be broadcast through towers that had been constructed around the world. It was also part of Gaia's security measures, helping to keep her hidden from the swarm. Hephaestus was named after the Greek god of fire and craftsman, though in this case the focus was on crafting machines to support Gaia's terraforming efforts. It was overseen by Margot Shane. Machines were fabricated at facilities across the world known as cauldrons and took the form of Earth's native fauna, both contemporary and prehistoric. Ether and Poseidon were overseen by Anders Larsen and Catalina Garcia Fernandez, respectively. Like the Greek deities they were named for, their purpose was to govern the air and water, detoxifying both after they were tainted by the Pharaoh Plague. Demeter and Artemis worked together similarly to Ether and Poseidon, and were overseen by Tanaka Naoto and Charles Ronson, respectively. They were named for the Greek goddesses of agriculture and wildlife, though like most of the Greek pantheon they had other aspects as well, which again speaks to their purpose. Demeter stabilized the physical environment and reintroduced plant species from cryogenically preserved seed stocks. Once the planet had been restored to a sufficiently habitable level, Artemis began using cryogenically preserved genetic material to reintroduce fauna with pioneer organisms that would further advance the biosphere. This was to be done in 2 phases, with more complex fauna coming later. Eleuthia and Apollo served to reintroduce humanity to the Earth and to educate the now fledgling species. They were overseen by Patrick Brochard Klein and Samina Ebaji, respectively, and were named for the Greek goddess of fertility and god of knowledge, medicine, and the sun, among other things. Eleuthia saw to the birth of a new generation of humanity from cryogenically preserved genetic material at cradle sites around the world. It would care for the children until they reached sufficient age, then Apollo would take over to educate them with its database of all human knowledge that had been acquired in the old world. This also included teaching the new humans how to care for and reintroduce other animal species that were not considered to be pioneer organisms. Finally, Hades was the failsafe protocol to be activated when the biosphere was found to be non-viable. It was named for the Greek god of the underworld and overseen by Travis Tate. In the event, the system determined the terraforming attempt to be unsuccessful, meaning incapable of sustaining life as required. Hades would override all other functions to wipe the slate clean. It would return the world to a barren, lifeless state, then hand the reins back to Gaia to begin again. The Hades extinction protocol was activated a total of 3 times, in 2154, 2161, and 2168. However, before that, there was other work to be done. Minerva was able to brute force the deactivation codes for the Pharaoh Plague about 50 years after Zero Day. With that done, and the swarm no longer posing a threat, Hephaestus was fired up to begin building the necessary machines for Aether and Poseidon to fulfill their roles. On the 4th iteration of the terraforming system, Gaia was successful. Demeter and Artemis were able to begin reseeding and repopulating the world with flora and fauna, and a new generation of humans began to be nurtured at cradle facilities by Eleuthia. This was a success, but it did not go exactly to plan. To examine why, we must again look back. On Zero Day, as the Alphas were finishing their work on Gaia Prime, a security alert showed them that one of the exterior seals for the facility had malfunctioned. It had not closed within the tolerances needed to keep Gaia's energy signature hidden from the swarm. Someone needed to fix it. From the outside. Or humanity's last hope would die. While the Alphas were arguing about who should make the sacrifice, Dr. Elizabeth Sobek donned an environmental suit and exited the facility to fix the seal. After letting the other Alphas know they were safe and could complete their work, she set off to her childhood home. Having already accepted her fate, she reflected on her life and the world she loved. Though Ted Faro was not an Alpha himself, he was still involved with the project. In his last meeting with Dr. Sobek before Zero Day, he showed clear signs of guilt and the prelude to a mental breakdown. Even after Zero Day, safe in his own bunker known as Thebes, he constantly pestered the Alphas for updates on their work at Gaia Prime. Given their important work, which he did not understand the technical intricacies of, and the fact that Dr. Sobek was the most experienced in dealing with him, she took the brunt of these calls. As time went on, Faro became increasingly erratic and obsessed with preventing this outcome from ever happening again. Specifically, he began asking more about the Apollo project. After Dr. Sobek sacrificed herself to save the others, Faro's obsession turned far more sinister. He arrived at the belief that if humanity were allowed to learn of its past mistakes, specifically his mistakes, that it would be doomed to repeat them. Because of this, he sought to ensure that the humans who inhabited the New World would be perfectly naive. Unbeknownst to the Alphas, and even Gaia herself, Faro had previously gotten a backdoor installed in the system. He coerced Hank Shaw, a Hades beta, into installing an Omega clearance that superseded even the Alpha Prime's authority. With this, he deleted all copies of the Apollo archive, and accidentally deleted all Gaia backups as well. This will be relevant in a later video. He did not stop there. The deletion of Apollo would eventually be discovered by either Gaia or the Alphas, meaning that in Faro's deluded mind, they must also be addressed. Faro called a meeting with the Alphas, gathering them all in Gaia Prime's control room. He informed them of what he had done and of his conclusion that they must not be allowed to rebuild the archive. Despite their protests and assertion that he had effectively doomed the world for a second time, Faro remained resolute in his commitment to, quote, save the innocent new humans from the knowledge of their past. He then used his Omega clearance again to vent the room, murdering the remaining Alphas of Project Zero Dawn. Without the Alphas, and without Apollo, Gaia could only continue as she was. Gaia herself was complete, as were her remaining subordinate functions, but there was no hope of recovering the knowledge lost with the deletion of Apollo. She dutifully carried out her task as the years passed, including stepping aside when Hades was needed to wipe the slate clean. On the 4th iteration of the terraforming system, Gaia successfully created a biosphere capable of supporting life, and Eleuthia was activated. It performed its function well, rearing a new generation of humanity in its cradles. However, when the time came for the children to graduate into the care of Apollo, there was nothing more Eleuthia could do. It quickly began running out of resources to support the growing children and was forced to allow them to set out into the world. As a result, the children were left with barely the equivalent of a kindergarten education and quickly developed into largely superstitious tribal nations. They also began hunting the machines created by Hephaestus for resources since they were unaware of the terraforming system. While this was minor at first, it did eventually become a hindrance and later a larger problem. Gaia reprogrammed the machines to be skittish around humans for this reason. The loss of Apollo was felt in another subordinate function as well. Since the new humans were unable to learn about the yet frozen animal species that had yet to be introduced, The second phase of Artemis was never able to be implemented. This resulted in a world with relatively little biodiversity, but one that had blossomed back to life regardless. The plan had worked. After nearly a millennium, Project Zero Dawn succeeded. Gaia successfully terraformed the Earth and reintroduced life, though the results were not quite what had been planned due to Gaia being sabotaged by the very man whose actions necessitated her creation. The world was stable, and the human race would survive. That is, until a mysterious signal was sent to Earth, turning Gaia's subordinate functions into fully independent AIs themselves. But that is a topic for another video. So, what was Project Zero Dawn? A reset button. It was a selfless sacrifice by the greatest minds humanity had yet produced, supported by the lives it would never have been able to save, and intended to rebuild the Earth and the human race long after the Pharaoh Plague had been eradicated. The system was fully autonomous, governed by an advanced artificial intelligence named Gaia. She was capable of overseeing the entire terraforming system all at once and directing her 9 subordinate functions to take action. Though the system was sabotaged by Ted Faro, the same man whose actions set this entire story in motion, it did still accomplish its goal of healing the planet and reseeding humanity. Project Zero Dawn was a success, and humanity would live again to face its next challenge. Let me know if I missed anything, or if you have any suggestions of other media I should cover. Just don't start a fight in my comments. Please like the video if you enjoyed, and join the family if you want to see more nerdy shit. Remember, love recklessly. Start with yourself.